Hello, my name is Jack Heritage, practical karate instructor from the Cotswolds.
And I am Pat Woodward, amateur enthusiast and practitioner in a number of different martial arts styles.
And welcome to the Armchair Combatives podcast. Hello again.
Hello again, my man. How's things? We've had
all good.
We've had a very busy week, haven't we? We've been all over the place. I can safely say for the listeners at home that we have got a stunning special guest for the final episode of season 1 coming up. So
Absolutely.
make sure you stay involved for that. We should be getting the recording in sometime in the next week, and I think you're all going to be very, very happy with who we have chosen. It will be a slightly longer feature-length episode, so make sure you stay involved with that. But to the topic at hand, Jack,
Yes.
I wanted to have a conversation today about the formal structures of what you would describe as your traditional karate club, looking more specifically at, let's say, it's the difference between curriculum and syllabus. Now, there's two very long, very stuffy words.
Yeah.
So let's start, let's say, with your experience of formulating a club. When you were putting your syllabus together, what did the process look like? How long did it take? Were there things that you chopped and changed? Were there things from your previous experience in karate that you just went, do you know what? Don't need it.
Oh, okay. So, so syllabus is a really interesting one for me because I think it's actually a good thing to start with to talk about, the difference between syllabus and curriculum. And, this is something that I know Mr. Ian Abernethy has talked about at length as well, about like the difference between the two. But for me, it's like syllabus is more so like your it's like the expectations of your students, like things that you think they definitely need to know and be able to show and demonstrate to prove that they are at that specific level of whatever they're going for, bout-wise or whatever it might be. Whereas I think curriculum is more so like, there is a wide spectrum of things that you might teach within the club. However, some of those things might not be grading specific and they might not be expected of your students. It's just something that you teach alongside it. When it came down to like doing my own syllabus, well, bearing in mind we're on the second draft at the moment, we're trying to rework it before we start back in September with the kind of start of the school year and the start of the next year of CKS. But I think that the best piece of advice I got given was basically, what do you want your high grades to look like? What do you think is the standard of a black belt? And I think that's a really good place to start because it allows you to understand, right, what do I want my students to be able to do by the time they're at the level where most people look at and go, they know their stuff. So what is the stuff they need to know? So when it came down to actually writing my syllabus, I was kind of reworking the syllabus that I'd already been using up to that point. So for the listeners that might not already know, I used to teach for my old organisation that I used to be a part of. And obviously I was teaching their syllabus for a good 3 years, 2 to 3 years. And then eventually when we decided to kind of split and I decided to kind of go down the more practical side of things, obviously I had to make my syllabus practical or else I wouldn't really be a practical karate instructor. So some of the things that I had to do was kind of look at what was in the existing syllabus, what fit the narrative that I'm trying to push. So what fit the practical karate realm, what didn't, and if it didn't, does it need to be gotten rid of? And what can I put in its place? So honestly, I think the biggest one for me was adding in grappling skills, because most karate clubs don't really do that. It's more kind of like something that you either do on a very, very rare occasion or you don't do at all. And obviously a lot of the practical karate things, obviously we base it all around the application of kata, and kata is based on grappling. It's based on close quarters combat opposed to like distance fighting. So having the kind of base grappling skills in there were kind of like important. I think for me the hardest part of it was to kind of let go of some of the things that I've been doing for a long period of time. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff in traditional karate. I'm doing air quotations as we speak, by the way, like traditional karate, as in like karate of like the 1940s, 1950s. That is more so for the perfection of character and for the improvement of fitness, and therefore they don't have as much application in terms of usage. First of all, even in just like standard sparring, but more importantly, like usage in the kind of self-defense practical side of things too. So I think for me, like it was kind of treading that line of do I completely overhaul everything and get rid of the essence of what I've been doing, or do I try and work it so I'm keeping everybody happy? And I think I did that with the first draft. The one that I'm kind of editing now, I've kind of got to the stage where I genuinely, my attitude towards it is fuck it. If I don't need it, it's gone. And the syllabus is getting a lot smaller. Obviously, Pat, like it's actually probably a good time to kind of jump you in with this, just because you've experienced both sides of the syllabuses, and I'm not gonna go around and go which one do you prefer. Obviously, that's not what this is about. But what was the biggest difference that you noticed when I changed things over? Because obviously you've been training with me for quite a while now, and you've seen both of those sides of things.
I think, ironically, it was volume. Um,
Okay.
your syllabus was a lot more in depth than the previous experience under the old kind of club umbrella. There was a lot to be said for new new system is in place of like there's more focus on the grappling, there's more focus on the bunker, there's specific adherence to throws, specific adherence to self protection techniques in the syllabus. Whereas previously, the syllabus for, say, the yellow belt grading could have been as simple as five techniques or five
Sure.
combinations of technique. And that does not constitute, in my opinion, anything relevant to a competent martial artist. It's kind of like if you can do some straight punches up and down the room, if you can do some front kicks up and down the room, then like sure, you've got a good demonstration of that, but you're not actually demonstrating on a bag, you're not demonstrating on a person, you're not demonstrating if you know how to throw this, if you know where to throw this technique, you're not demonstrating if you have any mastery of doing anything other than it's the same as you're basically doing ballet or something up the room. Like it's not actually you're demonstrating a movement, but you're not being asked to show any form of understanding. And I
Yeah.
think
No.
that was a big thing with your new syllabus and hopefully the syllabus to come of
Oh yes.
do you actually understand why you're doing this technique? Do you actually understand where it's supposed to be thrown on the body? Do you understand where it's supposed to be thrown? In what situation? Do you understand the range? Do you understand the power generation needed to execute it properly? Do you understand these things? And even right under the kids syllabus, that's something that was always prevalent, which I think is very sensible because so many techniques nowadays in kind
Yeah.
of different, and you see it predominantly in kind of like the sport taekwondo or the sport karate clubs. And
Sure.
it's a
Yeah. Of
case of
course.
like it's like I see these taekwondo dudes and they're pulling off these amazing triple typhoon jumping backflipping kicks or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and it's like that's a really excellent feat of acrobatics, but I don't really see that much power generation. Like sure you're hitting three pads, but it's just a case of you're not really moving these pads. Don't get me wrong. That's not to say that I don't think Taekwondo players can't generate power. That's not to say I don't think they aren't impressive in what they do.
Oh no, definitely.
Um,
No, no, no.
but it's kind of there has to be an understanding of doing a really, really solid front kick. It needs to have application, it needs to have power, it needs to have placement, your stance needs to be solid. Don't get me wrong, it must be, it's a great feeling being able to pull off like a high kick to the head. But as I'm
Oh
sure
yeah. Sure.
anybody with any form of fighting or sparring experience knows, pulling off a head kick is something that you really only get in one out of 100 situations. And there has to be an understanding of like, can you set it up properly? Does there need to be feint? What do you need to do? Is it a counter move? Is it that kind of thing? And again, that's not something I have ever seen in the prior karate syllabuses I've been training on. And it's only
Sure.
really when you've escalated into the new CKS syllabus that there's been understanding and there's been a desire to teach that understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting you say about specifically about like kind of contextualizing what we're doing. Um, and it's like you said about like you were saying about the taekwondo kicks and stuff. Like for me, like they are very, very impressive feats, and they are amazing kicks to watch and demonstrate. But it all depends on what you're contextually trying to do with them. Like, you see people do those amazing jumping spinning kicks, and for me, it's like it's not something that I would particularly use in sparring. But I'm sure there are people that can pull that off. However, the people that can pull it off are people that have actually trained it under live circumstances with the goal of actually landing it on another human being, right? If you're only training it in lines or on a standard handheld target every single time you do it, you're obviously only going to get good at doing it in that way. So, like you were saying, I think one of the big changes for me was like everything we need to do, it needs to be able to be done on another person. And this is actually one of the things that I really want to change with the syllabus going forward. And I know this is something that I haven't quite got rid of yet. Obviously, we still do line work or Keon without a partner. We still do that as a way of training the technique. And it's still, at the moment, but it's going to change the way that we actually do the grading syllabus too, right? So when you come in to do the grading, you do your techniques in lines and show the kind of solo version of it. Now, funnily enough, I've been having a discussion with this about this with the other instructors at CKS, Stuart and Rekka, and we had a chat about it, and we looked and we were like, we can see value in doing solo Keon because it's good for people that are just trying to nail the technique. Do you understand the hip movement? Do you understand like the placement? Do you all of those things? However, if that's the main part of your training, it's not going to be as productive as getting somebody to do it straight away on another person, even if you're doing like a compliant version of the Keon. So this is one of the things that we're thinking of like adapting, is to make the grading syllabus and also pretty much all of the line work Keon like partner exercises. We actually did a little bit of this on Monday night in class, and I think it's far more effective because you're watching people go, oh, wait a minute, I didn't land that. It's okay, why didn't you land that? Okay, oh, because I wasn't thinking about this. It's like, okay, you weren't thinking about that because in your head, you're applying that to line work. You're not applying it to the visualization of having another person in front of you. So I think that there's a lot to be said for traditional methods are good in certain circumstances. Like things like line work, they all just come down from like the kind of the Japanese army military style of stand in lines, do as we say, follow instructions. And there's a great photo, and I'm sure like if anybody else listening is a karate person, I'm sure you've seen this photo of like there's got to be like 100 students in this outside courtyard with a guy stood on like this pedestal, just shouting like karate movements at these guys, and you can see why they did it because you got a sheer number of people, got 100 people that you're trying to get like learning whatever technique you're trying to show. It's like it's hard to do that. You can't go around every single person and go, "This is what you need to do. This is what you need to do." Whereas what you could do is line them all up and go, "This is what I want to see. I want to see, okay, knee up, flick the kick, whatever it might be." And it's like I can see why you do that, but is that the most effective way to train people for practical styles opposed to fitness military-based styles?
No, completely. It's a real understanding of like you have to know where your art came from originally, because
Yes.
as you yourself have said many times, both on the show and in person with me, karate now looked so much different even as early as the 1940s than it does today, because it's gone through
Oh
so
yeah.
much rapid evolution with the things like it's kind of post World War II and the outlawing of martial arts, and then the Western approach, and then the solely, then you kind of take it back to like the solely Japanese influence on the Okinawans, and it kind of just evolves over time. The original karate practiced by the Okinawans probably looks completely different to the karate that we're practicing today in the Cotswolds.
Oh, for sure.
And you very much get into this argument of tradition, I think, of why oh well we do this technique because it's tradition. Like yes, but is it still relevant? Is it still relevant today? So the argument then kind of becomes like you take something like I don't know kendo or hema or anything like that, and it's like yes, it's really cool to keep these arts alive. It's really fun to practice them. It's really cool to feel like the kind of traditional feeling and do a really cool sword-based martial art. But realistically, when was the last time you saw a geezer in the street with a sword? Like it's not relevant today on a practical level.
Sure.
you
Yeah.
have it's kind of those things of like the kendo guys and the HEMA guys and the Filipino martial arts guys when they fight with the sword and the knife and things like that. Yes, there's kind of aspects to be understood of like you can develop a knife defense system from this, but you take all these like solid battlefield arts and it's like you have to understand that unless you are a trained soldier who is not using a gun, which again you probably won't find even in today's kind of and unless you get down to the real nitty gritty of it, soldiers are trained to use guns, so you should teach them how to fire a gun before you teach them how to use a knife or a sword or anything like that. You very much get into this idea of like these guys know that what they're doing is 100% traditional and 1% practicality, whereas what we're doing in our self-protection oriented karate school is you want it to be a self-protection oriented, confidence building, combat art. You want people
Yeah.
to know what to do in a self-defense situation, and it's developing the soft skills as well as the hard. And so then you must get into the argument of when you were building your syllabus, were there any techniques specifically that you looked at and you went, okay, this is a 100% tradition leftover. This is something that I do not see any relevance in the modern system I'm attempting to put together for my modern day student.
Okay. This is where we're going to offend people.
Okay, trigger
Hold
trigger
on to your
warning.
hats.
I was going to say, let's put it in right now. Trigger warning. Moving forward,
Especially,
especially the
especially
karate guys.
if there's karate guys listening, or specifically Wado guys listening, they're going to be like shaking their fists at me.
Okay. Well,
Okay, so
if you want to contact us, I can give you Jack's personal Instagram, and then you can blow him up like that. I can give out phone numbers for the right price. I'm not above it, but yes, trigger warning. This is a
yeah, trigger
personal.
warning.
These are personal viewpoints. These are not motifs for the modern karate. This is just an interesting discourse on what Jack discovered building his own syllabus. Please feel free to get in the comments and tell him why he's wrong.
Yes, by all means, I will respond to every single one. Okay, so biggest one for me was the Kion Kumite, which is basically Wado's version of almost like a two-step, three-step sparring. The reason I got rid of it was because okay, so in in this kind of Keon, if somebody hasn't done it before, it's basically like set partner drills. However, the partner drills, for the most part, are not quite showing sparring, and they're also not quite showing grappling or application. So for me, it's like it doesn't fit into the way that we spar, as in light on the toes, moving around, looking for gaps, feinting, adding, layering in kicks, combinations, all of that kind of stuff, right? It doesn't fit into that because, I'm told I've got to do my reverse punch with my hand on my hip. Okay, so, right. That's point number one. Point number two is, based on the karate that I do, if my hand is on my hip, that is a simulation for me holding somebody or grabbing hold of something. This is what, we call the hikite, the pulling hand. So, it's a partner drill, right? Where I'm not sparring and keeping my hands up. I'm with somebody, but I'm not holding on to them. So in my head, I'm thinking, what the fuck am I doing then? Because genuinely, I don't understand. If I've got somebody in front of me, why am I keeping one hand on my hip as I punch? I don't get it. I don't think it teaches any useful habits. Stuart, the instructor that works with us, and he still does the Keons, but even he admits that how he trains them now, he's had to adapt them to make them feel more applicable, which I totally get, and I think fair enough. If he's finding a way to make them more applicable to the way that we do things, that's really cool. For me, I'm more of a if it's shit, let it go. That's probably the best way of putting it. Now, I know there's plenty of people that will probably still practice these, and the number one defense for stuff like this is usually it's good for beginners. It helps build up habits. It helps understanding timing, and for me, it's building up the wrong habits and it's building up the wrong timing. You're not learning how to do anything useful, in my opinion. Now, I know a lot of people might disagree with that. All I would say is do those techniques live with your hands down and your hand on your hip and see how far you get. That's probably all I will say on Keon. But similarly to that, there's some traditional kind of Wado movements. So in most karates they have like Zenku Sadachi, or they call it like Chokazuki or Oizuki, as you step through in like a front stance and stuff along those lines. We usually call that Junzuki. That's like our version of it. It's basically the same thing. It's just stepping forward and punching. Now we find that a lot in kata, and that's fine. I can see the usage for it in kata because it's a solo practice of a two-person approach. So the hand on the hip is simulating I'm grabbing hold of something and then I'm hitting them. So I can look at that and I can go, yeah, I can see how that works, because the kata isn't, there's not like a kata version where you do bad bunkai. Obviously, some clubs do that kind of thing where you have hand on the hip, you punch, they do a big head block and go, and then punch you back and go, hey, and like that's fine. That's a type of bunkai that people like to do. It's not a practical bunkai by any form, by any stretch of the imagination.
So actually, it's more a question of you don't feel like this is relevant when there's more practical bunkai in the syllabus.
Yeah, pretty much. It's one of those things. Like for me, it's like, do I want to waste training time on things that I don't think are going to be teaching anything useful? Like, if it's not going to be teaching you something that's going to instill a good habit or is going to improve your skill set, then what's the point in doing it, I guess? So for me, it's like, bunkai for me is all of the stuff we take directly from kata that has application when you use it with another person. So it's going to be automatically looking at you're grabbing hold of something, you're hitting them, you're moving, you're teaching arm manipulations, you're teaching the basics of unbalancing and throwing, and all of that stuff can be found within kata application. From me, taking a step away from that, you then kind of like break down the separate kind of disciplines. So you've got striking, you've got throwing, you've got grappling. In kata, you don't find it much groundwork, but that's something that we've added in, right? Because it's something that the karate community doesn't do very well in general. So that's something that I added in. So I think for the most part, it was like understanding, right, we need to have solid grappling skills, ones that can then transfer to the kata application. So if we can get our students being able to do basic wrestling drills, and this is exactly where we kind of taken them from, from things like collar and elbow ties to pummeling to taking the back and all of that kind of stuff. This is all basic, wrestling, grappling stuff that you'll find in any good wrestling school. And then, we take it the striking side of it. I think karate actually does relatively well, provided it's actually more of the sports side of karate, actually, opposed to the practical side, because they've got fast punches, but they also do cover power generation too in some schools. And then the other one was like the throwing and stuff, and some of that stuff is just genuinely just judo. It is just judo, simple as that. At the end of the day, why would I neglect some of the best throwers in the world to go, oh no, it's got to be done the exact way that the karate guys do it, because it is karate and it has to be a karate syllabus and nothing else can come in, no external, it doesn't make sense to me. To me, it's like, okay, we get the best things that complement each other and we build that into a cohesive system, instead of I'm sure this is something that other people do as well, but it's like stitching things together in a syllabus. What I don't want it to be is like, here's a bit of boxing, here's a bit of taekwondo, here's a bit of this, here's a bit of that. It needs to work as like a cohesive thing. And that was kind of the goal in general. Is it practical? Is it going to work? Is it going to teach the skills that I'm trying to get my black belts to look at? And if something along the way isn't fitting that mold, it either needs to be adapted and edited, or it needs to just get kicked off the team, is probably the best way to put it. So that's kind of like that's the method that I'm kind of like going down. Obviously, there's going to be changes to the syllabus as the years go on. I'm sure there's going to be things that I'm doing now that I'll go, you know what, that can go in 2 years' time. But yeah, so out of interest then, Pat, like what sort of experiences of syllabus have you had? Because not every martial art you've trained has a bout system. So it'd just be interesting to see like what other variations of like the way syllabuses work and the curriculum's built have you experienced?
So I think like the first two places my mind went to were my time in Coventry doing the Filipino martial arts and the Aikido, because the Aikido was like a much less formal thing. Whether that was just how I was being taught, I'm not sure, but it was very much we would be doing techniques, and the instructor would be like, I'm glad you got that because you need it for your grading, or you need to make sure you work on that because you need it for your grading." And it's kind of, I never saw a piece of paper in the same way that you provide us all with definitive. You need X, Y, and Z, one, two, and three for your syllabus, and for your grading, and we need to see them all done properly. So when I was doing Aikido, which has a belt system, a much shorter belt system I experienced. Again, that might just be the school I was in, not necessarily Aikido as a whole, but I think there was only 5 cues before you hit black belt. Um,
Okay.
the gradings were kind of, they were probably distanced about the same kind of way. Um, in the sense of, we would do one grading ideally every 4 to 6 months. Um,
Yeah.
I think there were, well, I mean, my Aikido instructor was a very sort of esoteric guy. He was very fond of a quote from Hirasawa Sensei, who was his teacher, who said, "You're a beginner for the first 80 years of your life." And that was kind of very much the attitude he approached everything, of like, just because you've got your black belt and you can put on the hakama doesn't mean you're a effective aikidoka. Like, he basically viewed it as like, this is the process by which you start training. Like, the white belt is when you
Okay.
start learning, and the black belt is when you start training. Like, you've dedicated yourself to this. So with the aikido, it was very much like, you would go in, again, a lot of traditionalism, proper mokuso, bowing on the mat. He would lead in with a traditional Aikido greeting and a traditional Japanese prayer and things like that. Very heavy on the spiritual side of things, which I personally, I loved it. Like, it felt amazing to be part of it. When I do Kendo or Aikido seminars now, I will definitely kind of, maybe not at the same level, but I will definitely insist on a proper mokuso, some sitting in zazen just for a moment of meditation before we begin, because that kind of connects me to the art. I don't feel, do you know, like, that's not a, you can't practically beat somebody up with a bow, but that is kind of where the traditionalism for me shines through, and should be held to. You should honor where what you're doing has come from. But when we would do the Aikido gradings, it would very much be a case of, okay, I need you to demonstrate an irimi nage, and you do it. It goes, they'd be like, there wouldn't be like a yes or no or a very good or that was bad. It'd be like, okay, now you need to show kokidage. And it'd be like, okay. And then it would be a case of, now I'd like you to demonstrate your sword form. Okay. Yes. Now I know your Jo forms. Okay. Now in the Randori, please. Okay. Very good. The grading is ended. And you would be like, oh, okay. And then we'd all line up, and there'd be another Zazen. And then it would be a case of, Patrick, you've achieved your fourth Kyu. Simon, you've achieved your third Kyu, etc., etc. We go down the line, and the whole point was like, if you did or didn't get anything, it was almost like you were expected to just simply acknowledge it, bow, thank the teacher, and move on. There was no kind of grand ceremony. There was no like punching the air or wailing commiserations or anything. The whole point was you approach it, excuse me, with the very Japanese, a very
Yeah.
centered reaction. Um, Very contrasted with like the Filipino martial arts, because again, no belt system. It was very much like, today we're learning this, today we're learning that, today we're learning how to fight with the stick. Today I want to do the thing that, and it was a great system for learning because it kept you on your toes. It was very much a case of like, there was no kind of stagnation and like, oh god, another grappling session, or like, okay, we're going to fight with the knife again
Yeah. Yeah.
today. And it's like, it was like, no, today, you know has everyone got their long blades with them? Okay, cool. We're going to do long blade today. Okay, has everybody got double sticks with them today? Okay, we're going to do double sticks today. And it was a good way of just kind of absorbing as much information as is possible. There was a lot to be said for like, it was kind of the metaphor of, imagine you're
Hmm.
like lying on the beach, and you're just kind of lying in the sand, and you're letting the water kind of run over you, and there's a little bit more water and a little bit more sand on you as time goes on. And it's kind of the idea of like, it's not all at once, it's not an overload. You're not being slammed with like this, you must do the technique, you must know this, you must know X, Y, and Z because the grading's coming up. It was, do I think you've gotten this? Cool. Do I think you haven't gotten this? I'll come back to it in a few weeks. It's like, it was a very I wouldn't say it would be lazy or laid back. I'm definitely not saying that, but it was a much less formal understanding. It felt much more like a. It felt much more artistic rather than kind of structured, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like
No, I can see that.
there was very much a thing. There was very much the understanding, like, yes, these are combat arts, these are combat techniques that you're learning, but I'm not. I don't need you to grab all of them at once. Just we're going to go through our forms. We're going to go through our patterns. Like knowing the patterns is really important, but if you don't get it on the first time, it's not like we've got grading in 2 weeks. Get it when you get it, which I think does help for certain people.
Yeah, yeah.
I know that conversely, like especially for like the kids, I think you had a really good. We've talked about your kind of you do like the stripes on the belt for the kids, like well done. You've done your Tagumi section in your syllabus. You've done your striking section in your syllabus. You get a little piece of tape for both.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's a really good idea, like giving the kids like the continuous feedback of like you are progressing, you are doing well, rather than just like for a whole 6 months you're kind of just, oh, okay, so am I doing well? Am I doing okay? Will I be ready for grading? Will I be this? Will I be that? And kind of just not giving them that kind of continuous haptic feedback of like, okay, so am I doing well? Or because kids obviously have a very short attention span. People can get in the
Oh,
comments and be like,
absolutely.
no, not my little Timmy. No, Timmy especially has a very short attention span. We've all seen it. Um, sorry, I'm sorry to like, sorry that like little Timmy is catching strays. But
Yeah, yeah. Timmy. It's always
it's,
It's
it's
always
always
Timmy as
Timmy.
well.
It's
It's
always Tim.
always Timmy.
Um, my heartfelt apologies to Timmy and family. Um, but no, I think it was very. This again is like it's my personal mindset of like I enjoy doing all sorts of different things. I enjoy feeling different ways in different gyms because you've got like some gyms are like, yeah, just come along in your shorts and your t-shirt, come in the tracksuit in the winter, we don't mind. Like we're not here to dress up, we're not here to play dollies. Like you're here to learn something physical, so make sure you dress for something that's physical. This kind of gets back
Yeah.
into the whole, is when I see these guys who are like, we are specifically no gi jujitsu, and like these guys who are like almost anti-tradition. It kind of almost comes into that mindset, but it's like at the same time, it's a great feeling to like put on a full gi, make sure your belt's tied properly, bow in at the start of the session, and it creates a really nice spiritual moment of like we are prepared. We have prepared our minds and our bodies for the training that we are about to receive and the training that we're about to
Yeah.
do and the physical exertion that we're about to do, and it becomes less of a gym session and like, no, this feels like it's got a bit of something to it. This feels like it's an art form. This feels like it's something that
Sure.
is a practice for my spiritual and mental health rather than just my physical one.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like we've kind of missed it. Maybe we can kind of get out there with a few of the class while the school's on hiatus for the month of August. But it's a real pleasure training outside. Um,
It is.
don't get me wrong, you get some looks, but hey, like just it's one of those where like I remember I trained very briefly with an Aikido school near Cardiff who would go to the park every Saturday in their gi and their hakama, and they would do their sword and their stuff, and they would roll around in the grass, and like they were ever it was always a happy and joyous time. Like it's nice to be out in nature and get the sun on your face and kind of take it from there. Um, I I think it does raise a very interesting point of every art's got a curriculum, but not every art's got a syllabus. If that makes sense, right?
Okay. Yeah, yeah. No,
So
I can
like
see that.
so like every single art has like these are the techniques that define this as Filipino martial arts and defines this as Aikido and defines this as karate. Um, I think it is a really interesting one of what do you think of the benefits of having specifically a syllabus?
Um, for me, I think having a syllabus kind of it just structures it structures your learning, and I think it structures the way in which you train. Now, as you'll know, Pat, and I'm sure some of the viewers have probably picked up by now, we do a lot of objective-based games. We do a lot of sparring that is related to you are trying to achieve this goal, the other person's are trying to achieve this. Sometimes it can be technique driven. Other times it might be just we're trying. for you to, take the back, or we're trying for you to, enter into a grapple from a strike, or like, there could be an objective. It could be I'm trying to seek a specific technique. However, because of doing stuff like that, we end up kind of, you end up with people that kind of find their own way and find their own kind of like way of fighting. They find the techniques that work for them the best and stuff. But I think it is important that the syllabus helps solidify the a few examples of techniques that display the principle that we're trying to get across. So a good example would be, okay, we start off with in grappling, at least, we start off with some basic like collar and elbow tie. That's one of the first things we teach, just to get the idea of control the arm, control the head. If you can understand that and you can do that well, you can easily start kind of turning that into slightly different things. You can turn that into overhook with a collar tie, or you can turn that a little bit into the fight to get to the head, and maybe you end up in plum clinch. Hey, look, I've got two hands on the head now. But they all kind of like are based on a principle of what you're trying to achieve. And I think without that, you end up with people that don't really have very well guided training. And I think it can make it a little bit more tricky. Like, I've always come from a syllabus based art, and I do find it difficult sometimes with training in arts that don't have that kind of syllabus. Like things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, I can't say that I do BJJ. I do more so like submission grappling is a better way of putting it. But as a lot of you know, I train with Jamie Clubb, and I do submission grappling with him. We don't, I'm not getting graded. I'm just learning skills, learning techniques, learning, the principles of ground fighting. And for me, coming from a karate background, one of the things that I do sometimes find myself wondering is like, shit, am I getting any better at this? Because I know it sounds silly, but there's a part in the back of my head, like the 7-year-old version of me is going, Jack, you haven't got your red belt yet, mate. You haven't got your red belt. You're not doing any good, mate. You're shit. And it's like, oh god, and I don't know what to do. So it's one of those things where, for a lot of people, I think having a syllabus that they can look at and go, I've hit this point, I've hit this point, I've hit this point, it can help them just go, you know what, I can visually see the progress that I'm making, and I can see that I'm understanding the things that my instructor is teaching me. However, on the converse side of that, you get people that train in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu clubs, and the way in which they find out if they're getting better is they start rolling with lower grades or newbies, and they go, oh shit, I'm subbing them really quickly. So there's different kind of metrics for whatever club you're in. For me, I find it so much easier to have a checklist of things that I need to achieve, because then I will happily sit down and work on said things. And you've experienced this, Pat, but when it comes down to grading time, obviously there's certain techniques that you guys need to be able to perform. There's certain techniques that I want to see on the bags. There's certain things that I want to see when you're grappling, in your sparring, what your objective might be. So as an example, in one belt grading, we try and get you guys to demonstrate your ability to use like sliding based footwork and hopping based kicks to close distance. It's a kind of like a very karate kind of thing, right? And because of that, we do like objective based sparring, and the sparring will be that your objective is that during the sparring bout, we want to see you using those things. And because of that, I like to think that for students, at least, when it comes down to that grading period of the year, that those last couple of classes before grading, we're able to go, okay, these are the things that you need to be able to show us. You have the opportunity now to work on them and practice them. So that's for me kind of why I think syllabus helps. But both methods have their own kind of like benefits. You've trained in both of them. So
yeah, I think you make a really, really valid point about kind of class focused, not necessarily rewards, I don't think is the way to put it, but it's kind of, rather than seeing it on a piece of paper and going like tick tick tick, great, sensei's happy with my work. I think there's a really good understanding of like you said, the metaphor with the BJJ people of like, okay, actually I couldn't roll with these guys worth shit 6 months ago, but now these guys are coming in and they're like lower than me, and I can just get them in these really easy, swift submissions, and like actually
Yeah.
that's a good feeling. I am improving, and I think it's that understanding of over time you will improve. It's just like you say, it's understanding what your club's metric for success is,
Yes.
which before those hands touch those keys is not saying that like BJJ has a good metric and karate has a bad one, or any vice versa or anything like that. It's about understanding like, is this a traditionalist club? Will there be gradings? Will there be syllabus? Will there be pieces of paper that say you need to know these exact
Yeah.
27 techniques to grade? Will it be a partner based metric? Will it be a case of you spar with certain people in your grade range or your belt range or your the range with which how long you've been training in the club? Will that be how you measure your success? Will it be simply a case of one day someone will come along and be like, "That's a great submission, Jack. Well done," and you can go, "Oh wow, actually, I am improving. That's a really nice feeling." And
Yeah.
you have to.
To be fair, sorry,
You,
but to be fair, Pat, just to interject, the only reason I want to say this is that I want to be very, very clear that the way that we run the club, we want both of those things to be happening. We want to see on paper that you're getting the ticks from the instructors saying you know how to do this because we've seen you competently do it. But the competency comes from your ability to do it live and do it in sparring against somebody that's actually resisting. So just before any keyboard warriors going, oh, typical karate guy is all he needs is them to do it in the air once and then they get the black belt. Like that's not how we run things. So just thought I'd throw that out there. Sorry, Pat, for interjecting.
no,
But
no,
I thought I'd make sure I say that before I forget.
no, but again, very valid point. Of there are clubs out there, and there are bullshido guys out there who will be like, "Ah, well, just because I've seen you do it in the air 100 times must mean that you've done it." I think the most grounded version of this ungrounded mindset, if that makes sense, is the 100 saburi idea. So there was this idea of like, when I was doing work with the wooden sword to simulate obviously the katana, the idea would be like you need to do 100 Jodan cuts before you've grasped the technique. And don't get me wrong, one out of those 100 Saburi was probably a really solid Jodan cut, but I can't remember which one it was, and the teacher certainly wasn't fucking watching me when I was doing all 100 of them. So, would you rather not just have me do 5 or 6 with a partner, and the partner go, yep, didn't dodge that in time, that was a good cut, that was solid? Obviously, you can't go around smacking each other with wooden swords all the time. Um, because that's how you lose students and that's how you get injuries and things like that. But if you have a set partner drill, like you say, with an objective, whether you know it or not, those are a lot of those drills exist in karate already. Ecological dynamics might be a new phrase, but the principles of it, I would argue, are not that new at all. Um, but the idea is you have these kind of like if you have a partner drill that is designed to measure the effectiveness of, let's say, your Jodan cut or your Keisagiri or something like that, then you're going, oh, actually, yeah, the technique seems solid. He's got a lot of power behind it. I can see he's doing it. And you go, actually, you got that in 5 cuts rather than 100 just in the air because it's so easy. Unless you've been told the exact method of like, no, each one, you need to make sure you're breathing. You need to make sure you're doing this. You need to make sure your footwork is right. You need to be cognizant of every single cut you're doing. You need to be aware of the relevant minutiae. That's fine for practicing, but that's
Yeah.
not learning. That's a case of, and it's very easy in 100 repetitions to create a bad habit unless somebody is stood there watching you and going, no, footwork is wrong, or the cut isn't, or the cut isn't straight, or the edge isn't aligned, or your back's not straight, or anything like that. All of these inferences are so relevant and they need to be observed. I remember I was showing somebody sword work. I was doing a private teaching with somebody, and I was showing him this kind of Jodan cut where you raise up straight over the head and you cut straight down. And I was just kind of trying to emphasize with him, like, you need to move the feet as you cut. And I was demonstrating to him, and he was like, wow, you've got that so down. The movement is so in sync. And I'm kind of thinking about it now and going, like, I don't know when that clicked. Nobody said, bam, you've got it. Like, that might have come from 100 cuts. That might have come from one specific cut that I did really well. That I would imagine that more came from continued partner practice than it did from 100 repetitions on my own. You can There are definitely exercises you should and need to, I would argue, be doing on your own. You need to be working on power generation on your own. You need to be hitting the bag. You need to be hitting the pad. You need to be doing the kata. But if you solely practice those things on your own and you're not being viewed by your teacher, by the person training you, then you will so easily develop bad habits that will come back
Absolutely.
to bite you in the ass one day, if not very soon.
It's interesting you say about bad habits as well, because that is something that is so common from solo practicing, like bag work, like standing line work, and all of that kind of stuff. And it all comes back down to visualization and objective. And if your objective in your syllabus is your objective is to show me this technique in the air to get to your purple belt, you'll realize that people will only focus on just, okay, I kind of know it's got to look a little bit like this, and then I get my belt. If you add in the visualization and the context of what that technique is and what it's trying to do, you start adding in a lot of things. So one of the big ones for me is guards. And I know it's such a simple part of martial arts, but you see it a lot with kids. Whenever you're teaching anything solo, just to kind of get them to understand the technique, 9 times out of 10, at some point, a few of them will drop their hands because they think, well, I don't need to have my hands up. Nobody's hitting me. I don't need my hands up. Nobody's trying to punch me in the face. I'll just do my, I'll
Yeah,
do my punches and let them drop.
and it's
And
such this thing of like, no, what you have to understand is like nobody's punching you right now, but you need to be cognizant of like somebody is going to try and hit you.
yeah, exactly. And do you know what? The biggest thing for me realizing this and was actually recently. I've known this for a while, but like a really good example of it was so. For those of you that don't know, I'm a personal trainer outside of this. I run fitness classes and stuff like that. And one of the classes that I do is like body combat, or we just call it combat. Basically, it's martial art moves to music. They have no relevance for fighting. It's just the same movements, but you just do it to the beat of the music. I'm very clear on the context when I teach it, because obviously in my head I'm going, oh god, no, why am I doing a side kick to the side? I'm not even looking at my target. This is awful. But it's fun, it's energetic, and I understand why people enjoy it. And as I enjoy it too, but I have the understanding of the context that a lot of people don't have. And one of the funniest things I was noticing was because people didn't have the context of either sparring or fighting somebody, you notice all of those little bad habits or bad practices start creeping in. And one of the biggest ones for me is watching people try and do uppercuts. Now, obviously, I'm demonstrating the uppercut as a martial artist. I've got my hands up by the side of my head. I'm turning the body, using my hips to drive the shot, and I'm aiming the shot right at the chin. Right, both of them, backhand, front hand. Okay. What you're noticing with people that haven't got that experience, they don't have the understanding of the context and they don't have the understanding of the visualization, is that they turn it into this kind of, is almost like they're fighting a two-headed beast, and they're hitting one all the way to the left and then one all the way to the right. And you're looking at it, and like in my head, I'm like, why the hell are they doing that? Like, in what fucking world is that going to work? But then I took a step back and I was like, wait a minute, these people aren't martial artists. They don't know what they're visualizing. All they've been told to do is hit upwards. And it kind of made something click to me, click for me a little bit, because I was like, this is the same issue that we have when we teach like new students or new kids and stuff. When we're teaching them this kind of like line work based Kion, although you can explain the context to them, they haven't had that live experience of actually having somebody in front of them. And this is why one of the reasons why now, like, we really over-exaggerate this idea of, no, you need to be practicing this on a partner from day bloody one, because if you don't understand that this is supposed to be landing on another human being, you're always going to make small habitual changes that don't take into account the things that you're trying to either avoid having done to you, as in getting hit, or you're going to completely miss them because you're not aiming at the right target.
No, completely agree. Like so many of these things become apparent in the bunkai drills or anything like that. Like I mean, you take something as simple as like the shuto that we've practiced.
Okay.
I don't know
On knife hand, yeah.
that I've practiced so many times. So like when I have seen it done in the kata, for those who don't, you kind of turn the armward out, so the forearm's facing outwards. The hand is held kind of flat, fingers together like a knife edge, and you hold that out, and it's a it's kind of almost looks like a block. But when we've done it when we've applicated it on another person, I always find my arm is at like almost a 45-degree angle, because the idea is it's a control point in the neck of you're
Yeah,
kind of
sure.
bridging that arm there, and then the other hand is what takes control of the attacking arm, or or does
It's basically an overhook and a
strikes.
frame.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
the thing, and it's one of those things where, like, if you don't if you try and do a straight shooto, then, like, best case scenario, you're just going to put your hand on somebody's face, which isn't a bad technique to
Yeah.
stop an attacker, but it's not going to do anything for long. It's not exactly a control position, and these things only become apparent with a partner. They
Absolutely.
only become apparent with a partner. If you are just doing them back and forth in your lines, or you're doing it in your kata displays or anything like that, you will develop crystal clear katas. You will develop excellent Keon. But so much of what needs to be had is partner based. And I think
Yes.
that, to circle all the way back, full circle to the beginning of the episode, I think that is the most important thing you have introduced in the syllabus we do today, which is, so much of it is, there's an emphasis of, like, learn your strikes, learn your Keon, learn your kata, but the biggest focus is, like, okay, now I need you to demonstrate it on a person. I need you to prove to yourself that you can hit, I don't care if you can do a back fist, reverse punch, front kick, back kick combo. If you can't land both of these things on a pad with power, or a person with any level of success,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter to me if those, you could look as crisp as you want in the open air. If you can't then combine these techniques in a sparring, a bunkai, or at least a power generation based sense, they are not being learned correctly, and something needs to change, either in the way I teach it or the way you learn it.
Yeah.
And that
That's a really important thing. Yeah.
and I think that kind of brings it, like I said, right, brings it all the way back to the very first portion of it. And
Yeah.
that's kind of my 2 cents on it, is like, that's where the difference between kind of curriculum and syllabus lies. That's the difference. Curriculum is all of your straight punches, your reverse punches, your back fists, your knife hands, your front kicks, your side kicks, your spinning kicks, your hook kicks, your whatever. All of that is curriculum. All of that is what this art can teach you properly. Syllabus is about breaking them down into what is appropriate for our beginners, to our intermediates, to our experts, to our masters, to our black belts, and beyond into our dans, or whatever your system
Yeah.
equivalent might be, and going, what is appropriate to teach first, and then what is appropriate to be tested, because it all needs to be tested before it moves on. And so many clubs and so many styles I see don't do it properly. I'm gonna bring up an old enemy of the internet, and I'm gonna say the biggest problem that I found training Aikido was, you need to feel the technique. You need to be willing to feel the technique to learn it, because once you, as the person performing the technique, understand the shifts in weight, understand the moments in the arm, understand the minutiae of, how do I turn his wrist, how do I manipulate his elbow, how do I work against the shoulder, how do I work against the stance, which you can't learn on an actively resisting opponent. Only then,
Yeah.
once you've learned those minutiae, can you then add resistance, because it's an esoteric art that focuses on the way that the body moves, and it doesn't move. And this is where, like, so much of its flack comes from, because, and I can say, because I have felt it, and I was resisting before you come and try and put that silver bullet in your chamber, keyboard warriors. True people who truly understand the techniques they're doing in something like Aikido, when they understand everything that comes into it, and they've practiced and it's become natural, like you learn anything, then these throws and these locks, they look so flawless, they don't look real. I'll say that for a fact. But I will also say, when you have lunged at somebody with what you think is a surefire straight punch, and all of a sudden you've just done 4 backflips and hit the floor, you don't think it was real either, because you're like, what on earth just happened? I barely felt anything. But it's one of those where, like, it's so easy to look at something like that and go, that's not real, that's fake. Um, I will say, I'll bring up there was a Jesse Enkamp video where he kind of tested like what's best, MMA, Aikido, or karate. He did this whole
Oh
thing, and
yeah,
he brought his brother in, and they were testing this guy out in like San Antonio or something. I don't fully remember the specifics. And his brother said something that really pissed me off, and I will say I didn't finish the video because of it. That's me. If you want to get in my face about it, come and find me. I'll see you in the comment section. But it was basically like his brother was playing the attacker, and it was a number of scenarios, and then he'd come in, and then Jesse would deal with it in a karate way, and the Aikido guy would deal with it in an Aikido way, and they'd be like, which one was better? I don't agree with that kind of proselytizing straight up, but sorry, not proselytizing, profiling. I don't agree with that kind of system straight away. I understand it made for a good video. That's not how I would argue is a good way to put the martial arts against one another. But the guy did his Aikido technique, and he threw Jesse's brother across the floor, and then like, which one was better? And the brother was like, oh, well, because this isn't a movie, I'm going to say the karate technique was better. And I'm like, brother, you still went down. The whole point is that you're not doing this for this guy's ego. The whole point is that you're being an actively resistant dude. And this is kind of where like this is kind of a tangent for another video or another day kind of thing. But this is the instance where like when you get into black belt in any system, you should know what you're doing. And that's what I would argue syllabus is supposed to teach you. Syllabus is supposed to take you from white belt to black belt and from black belt to your Dan grades as quickly and as flawlessly as possible, because otherwise you create your bad habits. If you're left to too much self-training, you create your bad habits on your own. If you have partners who are too amicable and they don't resist at the right times in the right ways, as you get better in your training, then you'll develop these bad habits of like, maybe it's just as simple as the ego of I know this technique works. Because when I did it on Jim in the dojo, he threw a straight punch, and then I blocked his arm and punched him 14 times in the kidney, and he went down because he didn't punch me the second time. I know that my technique is I know that my inner block is absolutely flawless and cannot be beaten because the guy threw one single punch and I blocked it flawlessly, and then I was able to do what I want. Bad habits straight away.
yeah.
So, with that ramble complete, Jack, we are just about to the end of our hour.
Okie dokie.
Do you have any closing thoughts on the vital differences between syllabus and curriculum?
Right. So I think it's actually kind of a useful way to kind of cap the episode would be to kind of like open up to teachers and instructors and stuff, and anybody that kind of has the power over their curriculum or their syllabus. And I think the biggest important thing is just knowing. First of all, knowing the difference, like what are you expecting of your students and what are you actually teaching your students? Like what is the difference between those two things? But I think the most important one is their objective. What is the objective of your club? What are you trying to hone? What are you trying to get out of your students? Because that's going to guide the syllabus and that's going to guide the way in which you teach. I've already talked in length in this episode, like the ways in which we've adapted things and, what we look at doing these days. And that all comes down to what I want my students to look like and how I want them to, be able to handle themselves, first of all, in terms of the self-protection side of things. But, like I said, we do sparring-based stuff too that isn't, specifically trying to, replicate real-life violence. We do plenty of like grappling sparring and, stand-up sparring too. If anything, we're moving closer towards that kind of MMA style where you are allowed to do a little bit of everything. But I think it's another important thing to remember is that syllabuses can change. Just because you've ran the same syllabus for however many years or whatever it might be, it doesn't mean that you can't change it and adapt it to be more suitable. The biggest thing for me, and I've done this a lot in the last couple of years especially, is I keep looking back at my CPD, my continue personal development. I always look at how can I as an instructor be better, how can my syllabus be better, and how can I better be prepared to instruct my students in a way that is even more efficient or even more enjoyable, and all of those things go into the way that I construct my karate school as a whole. So I kind of like implore anybody else that if there's anything that you're noticing in your syllabus that isn't coming across well, or your students struggle with, or there's anything that you find it's just not clicking, then maybe look at the ways in which you're teaching it, look at the ways in which you approach it, and if it's something that just isn't clicking with the rest of everything you do, maybe look at cutting it. So that's what I would leave people with today. Other than that, it's been an absolute pleasure. I always find it
You
really
as always, my
interesting
man.
talking about. Yeah, it's always a pleasure doing these conversations, and I think it's important, especially as a lot of the people that's going to listen to this podcast are going to be people that are in the martial arts space. A lot of them are probably going to be people that have been in the martial arts space for a long period of time. So conversations that kind of go towards potentially helping other instructors in some way, even if it's just like one thing we say that go, oh, you know what, I didn't think of that. Then this is worth doing for me.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, absolute pleasure, Pat. Nice to talk to you again.
And you, my man, as always, where can we find you?
Oh, you can find me everywhere. You'll find me on Instagram at Cotswold Karate School. Obviously, you can also find us both at the Armchair Combatives podcast, which you can find us on Instagram as well. You can also find us on a Facebook page that we've got specifically for the podcast as well now that I've recently made. On top of that, you can also find us on my website, which is www.cotswoldkarateschool.com. And Pat, where can we find you if we want to talk to you?
As always, my man, I'll be on the official Armchair Combatives podcast site, hoping to find somebody to argue with if you're out there. But if you want to find me for a much more pleasant conversation, then please contact me at Good Medicine Martial Artist on Instagram. Jack, as always, a big pleasure, my man, and I will see you for the penultimate episode of season 1 next time.
Exciting. I'll see you then.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.